So, hello, Kirsten. It's lovely to have you on the Integrative Medicine Matters podcast. We're going to talk about lots of things, including your new book. But first of all, I just wanted to start by asking you, why does integrative medicine matter to you?
Morning, Elizabeth, and thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. It's very lovely to be here. So, integrative medicine, why does it matter? I mean, I think that the great strength that integrative medicine offers is the opportunity to put the client, the patient, the person you're working with back front and center of the treatment, because what we're aiming to do with integrative medicine is look at the whole picture. So look at their internal terrain, everything that we can assess that's happening internally, but also their external environment and influences, and their everything that's open for them as well. So what's accessible to them? What can they achieve? What's feasible for them? What do they want to do? What do they not want to do? What do they like? What do they not like? All of those things we have the opportunity to factor in. And that's really important, I think. And it's an opportunity that gets wasted a lot of the time. In fact, even in integrative medicine, we talk the talk, but we don't always walk the walk with all of that. But we certainly do have more time and more opportunity and more of an understanding that that's what we really need to be doing. I've been ranting a fair bit lately about the concept of evidence-based practice and how a lot of people seem to think that that means only going with the evidence. And nutritional therapists such as myself are often told we're not as evidence-based as other practitioners, largely because the firm clinical evidence often isn't there. But actually, if you look back to the original definitions of evidence-based practice, there are three tenets. There's the evidence base, there's the experience and expertise of the practitioner, and there's the client or patient preferences and values, all of those three things. And I think those two last things often get missed out. So my expertise, your expertise, our experience, the experience of our colleagues that we can draw on as well, the people that have come before us. But first and foremost should actually be the person we're working with. And they often just get completely ignored and not listened to and not heard. And often there's a situation where they don't actually know themselves, because especially, as you may know, I work a lot with cancer patients. I'd say about 50% of my patients have a cancer diagnosis or are recovering from cancer. And they're often kind of like a rabbit stuck in the headlights. They don't really know what they want, or they're grabbing onto things fearfully. So actually helping people get to the place where they can actually feel they know what they want and which direction is important for them to go in.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
I think you're bringing really important elements through. This idea of the empowered, patient-centered model is a lot more challenging than we might think. We might think, oh, this is all straightforward. But the patients or clients experiencing different systems, which can be very confusing. And sometimes when they're vulnerable, it's hard to bring it together. So having that safe space in which to explore or even kind of center on what you might want to do takes time, doesn't it? And as you say, that rabbit in the headlights is often fear. And I would join you with the rant about the evidence base. It was always written about as a mosaic of evidence, and yet the randomized controlled trial has become everything. It just can't be the case. And many people writing in academia were really clear about that patient experience, the client experience, the evidence kind of triangulating into clinical decision making. So I like the phrase evidence informed, because we also don't always have the evidence that we need. Sometimes we've got the evidence, but nobody's reading it. And so that can create a clash as well. How do you communicate with, say, like with a team, a cancer team? Do you ask your client if you can write and summarize? How do you deal with that element of integration?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because a lot of oncologists still don't want to know.
Mm.
They'll just say, quite openly say, I don't know. Or occasionally they might refer people to the pharmacist to go through supplements. So that's happening a bit more frequently now. I generally write out the initial recommendations. I type up and present in a way that the person can show them to whoever they need to, whether it's their oncologist, the pharmacist, their GP, another practitioner that they're working with. So it's all there for them. I will offer to write to and have written to doctors and oncologists as well for that kind of personal one-to-one communication. Sometimes my communication doesn't even get read.
Yeah. Yeah.
So actually it's often more successful when the person who's going through the treatment actually says, here's a bit of paper with my recommendations on it from my nutritional therapist. What do you think? But I do encourage them to do that. But there have been instances where people have been referred to me by oncologists, which is very lovely. And also I've spent many years working alongside doctors who would perhaps now be considered part of the functional medicine. Functional medicine is a relatively new title and new training, but there have been doctors who have worked in that way for years. I've worked alongside a couple of those, so that's been really nice too.
Yeah. So there are different ways to bridge
Mm.
the gap. So let's talk about your beautiful book, Nutrition Brought to Life. I wanted to ask, first of all, what motivated you to write the book? What were you feeling was needed in the space?
Well, people kept asking me to recommend them a book. And I really struggled with that because there are lots of really great books out there that focus on like a single nutrient or a single diet type or a single aspect of health or a single condition. But there are very few that look at nutrition as a whole in the way that's not just for people who are studying nutrition. So there are nutrition books out there that maybe give a more complete picture of like macronutrients and micronutrients, but they're kind of, most of them are practitioner focused. I mean, my book is practitioner focused as well, but it's also, a lot of my clients read it. A lot of people who are interested in nutrition but not practicing or training read it and enjoy it. But I've also had a lot of great feedback from students and experienced practitioners who have really found it useful as well. So that's what I wanted. I wanted a book that could be useful for everyone, that just covered the fundamentals in a way that was really accessible and meaningful and useful, and that people could use in their day-to-day.
Yeah. And I think that word accessible, first of all, it felt very comprehensive, the way you went through, different elements of nutrition, but also the way you write allows you to be, clearly communicating some of the key kind of scientific or knowledge-based information, but then it moves into reflection, which I really like, the way you got people to reflect, and then into kind of practice and action, mainly around changing diet and nutrition. I wanted to dive into that adrenal chapter because, first of all, I love the picture of the adrenals sitting on top of the kidney, but also as someone, who had very significant burnout about a decade ago, I so wished that my GP or the team who looked after me very kindly, but I wish that there'd been more knowledge, and I still feel that now, about adrenal health. I just wondered if you might talk to the listeners about what you see as key in terms of supporting these amazing glands, or maybe tell us a little bit about what they are and what they do, because I think they're sometimes overlooked.
Yeah, and they were really the buzzword for a while, but I think you're right. Whilst they were a real buzzword in the in the kind of my world, the whole concept was being completely poo-pooed by conventional medicine, and now it's kind of faded into the background again. But the adrenals are essentially part of the whole hormonal system. And I describe the hormonal system, it's a communication system. So I describe the hormones often as letters that you might want to put in the kind of post box to send to somebody. And the postal system is like the blood circulation. So it takes a little time for the messages to get there. And we have different message systems. So like the nervous system, for example, is a bit more like email. It's like it's fast, and it has faster nerves and slower nerves as well. So it's like sending emails and instant messages and things like that. So we have all of these different communication systems to tell various parts of our body to start doing things or stop doing things. Essentially, that's what they're doing. And we often use both. We'll send an email and back it up with a letter, or vice versa. So the hormones are our letters. They can take a little bit of time to travel, but it's not days like the Royal Mail is.
Or weeks.
And they work together. So there's normally a chain of command there. So we think about, so there's hormones that come from the brain that trigger the adrenals. So the adrenals sit on top of the kidneys. And those hormones released by the kidneys are involved in our stress response generally. So they are things like adrenaline, which we now call epinephrine, and noradrenaline, we now called norepinephrine, and cortisol and DHEA as well. And essentially, when we have a stressful event, we release lots, and then it all kind of ideally calms down again. And then over time, if we continue to get stuck in that stress response, or stressful things continue to happen, then our adrenals can start to flag, because they don't just make these letters up out of nowhere. So hormones, just like letters, they're made of hard materials. So rather than paper, they're made of, depending on the hormone, proteins or cholesterol and other nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and we need lots of vitamins and minerals to make them and release them. So there's a lot of raw materials that are involved in that. So we can run out. Those same raw materials are used for lots of other things in the body too, and for other hormones as well. So we're continually working one area that can pull on another area. So that's one of the reasons why our adrenal hormones have such a close relationship with our thyroid hormones and with our reproductive hormones and other hormones in our bodies. They're all classically described as an orchestra. So they're all pulling on each other all of the time. So yes, so they also have their own rhythm as well. So we do release adrenal hormones like cortisol, for example. We can look at our cortisol balance or patterns to see what's going on there. Because what cortisol does is it releases a little bit of sugar into the bloodstream so that we have some energy. And that might be, if we have a big shock, like a tiger jumping into the room, it can be so that we might run away from the tiger or fight the tiger, for example. So actually our cortisol levels rise generally in the morning to help us wake up and give us a bit more energy, and they slow down towards the end of the day as we want to get to sleep. So we can look at our cortisol patterns through things like saliva and urine tests, for example, to see if that curve is happening nicely, or whether it's dysregulated in some way.
I wanted to ask about that because, there's so many prescriptions of antidepressants. I think, like one every 10 minutes or something like that in the UK. And yet there's very few cortisol testing initiated in mainstream medicine. This is like a real question for me, which I would love to look at through an evidence-based, evidence-informed lens. It strikes me this has been one of the important things that the nutrition teams across the UK do, is just to have a mind to think about, let's look at whether your cortisol is dysregulated. And data, we know from continuous glucose monitors now that data can be so great for behavior change. I haven't tested my cortisol level, but I started to realize that it might be too high in the morning, causing insulin resistance. So I just wondered what your thoughts would be about how we could introduce testing more routinely, and how we would, I don't know, persuade medical teams that it could be really useful to have that information for your patient client.
Yeah, I met a GI surgeon, so a colorectal surgeon, a couple of months ago, who is from South America, and she was telling me about how in at least a couple of South American countries, because the health services are so under-resourced there, they do more testing, not less. We seem to do the opposite here. Our NHS is under-resourced, so we do less preventative work, and do a lot more mopping up, which just seems crazy, really. So that's the kind of sea change we need to have happen, is that switch from thinking that we can't afford preventative tests to actually preventative tests will likely save us money in the long term.
Yeah. And even looking at, work-based stress and having that facility to test. How
Mhm.
much would a saliva cortisol test be? When you
Yeah.
initiate it, how much is it?
It's among the cheaper of the private functional tests that you can do. So, you're not talking hundreds of pounds. You might be talking, like 100 and something, like in the low 100s. But obviously, if that's kind of scaled up and there's an organisation like the NHS offering those tests, I'm sure that it won't be costing them quite as much as that. So
Yeah.
it's, I don't know what the actual cost would be if they were doing it in their own labs. The NHS typically just looks at cortisol serum, blood serum, like they take a blood test for cortisol,
Yeah.
but it will only be once a day. So they're not looking at that curve. They're just seeing if there's a spike in the morning or if it's really low in the morning. Generally, they're not looking to see what that curve through the day is like. And that curve can often tell us quite a lot. And sometimes it really sinks in with people's experience. So I might see something like a cortisol level that suggests the adrenals are just exhausted and really struggling to get going, but they manage to get going by the end of the day. And you see the curve at the end of the day rather than the beginning. And the person whose test it is will say, yeah, I do have more energy towards the end of the day. I'm exhausted when I wake up. I really struggle. And then in the evening, I have this burst of energy, and that's when I get things done. And you can often see that reflected. But also, people are really good at pushing through their stress. And when we're in a super stress stage or long-term stress or in trauma specifically as well, we kind of disembody a bit. We disconnect from what's actually going on with our bodies. We stop feeling it. It's a natural part of the fight, flight, freeze response. Or the fight, flight, freeze, collapse response is to disengage. Mm. You could say, because if we are about to be eaten by the tiger, it's too painful to experience. So let's just disengage so we don't feel. Or
Mm.
if the trauma's already happened, let's disengage so we don't feel. So whether it's a threat or post trauma, and that's quite an extreme example, but I think we do this on varying levels all of the time. So we disconnect quite a lot in response to stress. So we don't actually feel how much stress we're under. And this is where testing can be really useful, because I'll take somebody's case history, which involves me listening to them for quite a long time. And at the end of it, I'm thinking, my goodness, this person has just had so much stress going on. And I'll ask them, how stressed do you feel and how do you manage your stress levels? What do you do to manage? And sometimes the answer comes back of, oh, well, I don't really get stressed. I'm fine. I just don't really get stressed at all. And that's when I might order a cortisol test, because it will show them in black and white. I mean, no test is 100% conclusive, but it will mirror back to them. Look, there has been this level of stress going on that is possibly affecting the way your body is responding. Can you please acknowledge this? And it's part of the process of them actually reflecting and sitting there and thinking, oh, yeah, no, maybe I do need to do something about the stress in my life. Maybe I do need to be more proactive in processing it.
Yes. And you're using data to reconnect people into their bodies, which I find fascinating. And we often do need that data. As you say, we adapt quite well because we feel we've got to carry on. And so we adapt. And I think that what's interesting, again, for me recently looking at my metabolic health, I realized that stress was playing a part, but is often the most difficult thing to change. So that's why we can get into ignoring it. And then we might use medications that switch off feedback loops, like omeprazole would switch off a feedback loop that you've got too much acid, you're opening up that sphincter at the top of your stomach because that is a flight and fright response. So the system is also good at helping us switch off. But I haven't heard anyone say that sometimes you'll use data to kind of wake people up, which I think is a great thing. And I love the way that you're coming back to the consultation. I just wanted to say to listeners who might not be used to this word functional, that it's really quite a useful moment just to define that functional medicine, which as in the last 10 years, quite strongly, mainly through nutritionists, but doctors joining because they've wanted or thirsted to get to root causes. And that root cause could be a deep understanding of organs, of hormones, of neurotransmitters. What I love listening to you is just, again, honoring this incredible orchestration of the body and how much is happening every minute, every moment that we take for granted, sometimes need a piece of paper saying, this is showing that you're stressed. I wanted to ask you, because I'm always aware in the NHS that the mantra we always had in training was, don't do a test that you can't create change or wouldn't create your change. I guess when you're looking at that dysregulated cortisol curve through the day, what kind of things then do you recommend to people?
Yeah, well, it has to come back to the individual. And again, testing can be really useful for some people. For other people, it's that same test would be a waste of money. Some people just don't respond to that kind of data. For some people,
Yeah.
actually, it's just talking through with them what's going on is just as effective and cheaper, actually. So it's not always useful, but it can be really useful. So again, what I would recommend would depend on who I'm working with. So if it's somebody who is just super busy, I'm reminded of somebody I met on a retreat, and I was talking about mindful eating and the importance of creating space and sitting down and just relaxing for a few seconds and engaging with what you're about to eat and having a few mindful mouthfuls at the beginning of each meal. So I talk about that a lot. And she said to me, my work is so busy. My lunch break is my walk from my office to my meeting room.
Mm.
And I can't change that. So instead, we talked about how she could take that walk and slow it down, not in terms of actually how long it took her if you were to watch a clock, but in the way that we can all slow each moment down. When we live in the present moment, we can be in this kind of bubble that is completely calm, that stretches out for eternity in all directions,
Mm.
and just create this momentary space where time doesn't exist and stress doesn't play such a big role, and we can just focus on this process of this food that's in my mouth and how it feels in my mouth and how nourishing it feels while she's walking from her office to the meeting room. And it
Mhm.
won't actually take any longer, but it will completely change her experience of having that meal, which will then completely change how she digests and absorbs the nutrients from that meal. But also it's a little kind of almost snatched, sneaky moment of mindfulness.
Mm.
And we know a lot, there's been a lot written and experienced over the years about the benefits of having a mindful practice in the day, like a regular seated or on the mat mindfulness half hour or 20 minutes or hour or however long it is. But that's not possible for everybody. And
Mm.
even if it is, we don't want to just be able to be mindful when we're on the mat or on that chair. We want to be able to carry that sense of calm and space and centeredness and groundedness in with us through the day. So to be able to practice just at any moment, even when you think you've only got half a second, at any moment, just going, right, here I am, and actually experiencing that. The more we can practice that, the more we will be interweaving this mindfulness through the day. And every time we do that, we are regulating our nervous system, we're regulating our adrenals, we're bringing ourselves back to this calm place again.
I love that because I just feel that mindfulness is the bedrock of everything that we do, and that, just the pause. We often get caught up, and, I know that when we're running the master's program in integrative healthcare, that sometimes our learner group are like acquiring knowledge, acquiring knowledge, acquiring knowledge. But there's something, isn't there, about, when you described a time-space continuum there, that I suddenly calmed down, So it's like what we're doing minute to minute in the room with someone else is what they will also absorb, rather than what I thought you might have said is, take NAD or something like that. What you did was say, look, we've got this ability to calm down. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. And that's the most powerful ability we have. And it is accessible. I'm not going to say to everybody, because some people are in such a trauma state that it's not accessible to them right now. And we have to be mindful of that, who we're working with as well. But for most people, that's a really accessible thing that does take practice. It's called a mindfulness practice because we
Mm.
have to practice it. So it doesn't, that so many people saying, oh, I can't do that. I just can't. It's like, well, none of us can really. So we practice it and then we get better at it and then we can.
Yeah. And it does require practice, but if we support people into that practice in different ways, like we had a lovely mindfulness for cancer 8-week courses that we ran over 2 years. We'd love to get more funding, more sustainable funding, but that was really important for people during and beyond cancer treatments to have an environment where it was really valued. And I think that's what I find when I sit in my meditation group, that everyone is valuing this pause, because we can all forget, can't we, in the hurried way of living. It might start to feel irrelevant. And just to say also, this is what a doctor or practice nurse or someone can do in the room in a short consultation, is value what their client patient might be doing and finding important. It's what's difficult is where the things you're finding important are negated, whatever they might be. So we all start to connect across this big healthcare provision, which runs right through communities and third sector and primary care and secondary care, because there's so many people like yourself, like myself, working outside the mainstream.
And actually, it's in the other huge benefit of practicing being present and being fully in our bodies, fully appreciative of what our senses are telling us, is that we start to hear and feel which direction we need to go in. So if we have to make decisions about how we're going to support our health, and we're in that rabbit in a headlight space where we just don't know, the more we can practice this, the more we start to get little messages or feelings. We might get a little bit more drawn to something or a little bit more drawn away from something that doesn't feel like it's coming from the confusion in our heads. It feels like it's coming from somewhere much deeper. And I often describe it as the same kind of feeling that often in the winter we don't want to eat a salad, for example, that same kind of sensation of maybe not now. Even though our head might think that that's a really healthy plate of food, our body's going, but not now.
Yes.
So that kind of sensation, and that can really help us make bigger decisions about our treatment. And also I encourage people, it's just such a lovely moment where I start to see that happening with the people I'm working with nutrition. So
Mm.
when they're exploring what kind of diet they should be following, and there's so much out there now, and people have so much access to information about different diets and different books that are telling them do this, like do a vegan raw diet, do a keto diet, do a paleo diet, do a carnivore diet, do a Mediterranean diet. And they're like, I don't know which way to go.
Mm.
And we can, I can use my expertise and the advancing evidence base around this to give them some guidelines. But ultimately, I want them to be guided by their bodies. And it's a beautiful moment where, we play with maybe one or two of these concepts and they come back saying, I feel better doing this right now.
Yeah. This is so important because I often see, personal plans that are 3 pages long. When you ask the person, they said, "Oh, I didn't do any of it because I was so confused by it." And I think that's the other thing is landing somewhere where the person takes the next step. They take their next step. And as you say, it's not always possible. Sometimes people want you to move into expert mode and recommend whilst they're building confidence back in their bodies. But I think when you get to that point where the person's back in charge and might even challenge you and say,
Mm.
actually, I don't want that. I'm going to go that way. That can feel like a really important moment.
Yeah, beautiful.
So I want to mention a few recipes because like if we're thinking about adrenal health, you've got lovely recipes in your book. Like again, sometimes it can be really nice to take away a recipe rather than a supplement. What would you be thinking of there with someone who's clearly got a bouncy cortisol at the wrong time of day?
Yeah, you asked me about nutrients a while ago and I answered you with mindfulness. Yeah, there's lots of there's lots of lovely things that we can consider. I mean, we often think as nutritional therapists, we often think of B vitamins first, when we're thinking about adrenal health. And for me, B5 is always top of
Mm.
the adrenal vitamins. B6 is helpful too. They're all great. They're all fantastic. So to get a broad array, but also amino acids. So we need to make sure there's protein there. I'm very mindful that one of our, we've got some really lovely calming neurotransmitters that we produce in our bodies. One of them is acetylcholine.
Mm.
To make that, we need specific nutrients, one of which is choline, which is also considered a B vitamin. We get choline naturally in things like egg yolks and liver as well, and in small amounts in seeds.
Mm.
Um, so so that kind of needs to figure somewhere. Um, and yeah, various vitamins and minerals. So I have some, for example, I have a recipe in my book for calm bars that have sunflower seeds, and I think there's some tahini in there as well for the sesame
Mhm.
seeds, maybe, and some really lovely nutrients in there that tick a lot of those boxes. But I also have some, in my nutrition training, we were introduced to the Chinese 5 elements, which I'd already learnt to love through just doing Tai Chi and Qigong. And my first nutrition book was Paul Pitchford's Healing with Whole Foods, and he talks about the 5 elements and the traditional Chinese medicine approach to that. So, and it's something that I've continued to really love and explore. So I really like working with the elements as well. So there's certain foods that can be more grounding.
Mm.
So I have an earth element soup, which has the lovely colours of like oranges and yellows, and the kind of squashes and carrots and root vegetables are really earthy, grounding foods. And the calm bar also has, I think, some apricots in there as well, with that lovely orange
Mm,
colour that's grounding. We can also think about the water element. The colours are black, so things like black beans and also seaweeds and the really dark green leafy vegetables. They can help nourish the kidneys, which
mhm,
support the adrenals. The adrenals are a bit more fire element as well. So making sure the fire element is not kind of spluttering, but nice and calm. We talk about quieting the Shen in the heart
mm,
to calm that. And again, just kind of grounding, soothing, gentle. So, and keeping blood sugar stable. I know that's been a big theme for you
mm,
recently, and it's a massive theme for me as well. And I find having regular protein through the day, so not necessarily lots of snacks, but good amounts of protein at breakfast in particular, then lunch and dinner, I find really important for blood sugar stabilizing. Often, intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, I'm a big fan of too. But I've always gone for an early pattern with that, so an early breakfast, and then the fast by having a very early supper or late afternoon supper, and then fasting overnight, which again has been influenced by my interest in traditional Chinese medicine.
mm,
But it seems to work. It seems to work, that early protein-rich breakfast, and there are more and more
mm.
studies now coming out in favour of that being important.
I love the image of that beautiful soup. I'm already cooking with black bean and seaweed
Mm.
and those dark, dark colors. But I had my acupuncture appointment yesterday, which I have about every 3 to 4 weeks. And my blood pressure, which can be a problem and is part of my metabolic health. My God, it was just so low after my acupuncture treatments. I think this idea of the five elements, if our listeners want to learn more, it is a fascinating way of trying to understand, the body and how it's constantly balancing. So it's beautiful to hear you bring that in. Could I just ask, because I've just done a post and I'm curious about your response about creatine and, just talking about, you were talking about protein. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, creatine has got a lot of research behind it. It's a kind of newish star on the block, isn't it? People are really getting into, and it does seem to hold a lot of promise.
Mm,
So it's like the creatine, the collagen. It's, one of the things, especially that women are going for to support midlife and beyond, when we need a little bit of extra support. And I can see where it can sometimes be incredibly useful and incredibly helpful. I'm often a little bit cautious around suggesting really high intakes of a specific amino acid or a specific protein, or you know uh, especially in some situations. So that it's, for example, with people that I'm working with that have or are recovering from a cancer diagnosis, I'm a lot more cautious with things like that. But generally, for people wanting to support their muscle tone and their cognitive health, and to really, if these things are useful, then they're useful, and that's fantastic. And it's really great to see in evidence base forming for something like this. It's really lovely that we can then build our expertise around as well.
I love the way that each time you bring wisdom back, the wisdom of personalizing, the wisdom of letting the body decide, how to absorb nutrients and to be cautious about, too many supplements. Because sometimes, and I'm sure both of us see this in the cancer diagnosis, that people can be so frightened they start to do everything, and then that can be very expensive and I think very confusing to the body, pulled one way and another. So that kind of bedrock of reducing fear and then using things gently and appropriately, seems so important, as does choosing recipes that really embed some of what you're trying to convey. We're coming to the end of it's really whizzed by really quick. I wondered if there was anything else that you feel at this time you wanted to share with the listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say I don't shy away from supplements, but equally I've also seen people come to me with like, they're on 30 different supplements and
Mm.
it's just too much. It's, just fine tuning and making it all appropriate. Um, we're in a really exciting place at the moment um as nutritional therapists, as general integrative medicine people. We're in this really exciting place where we are starting to get more research and deeper insights. Technology is whizzing along so kind of scarily fast sometimes, because when technology improves so much, then it kind of gets out of control, and it's gonna do things in some spaces that are just horrendous. But with things like AI, for example, there is the potential for that to really revolutionize how we understand the human body and the human body's interactions with itself. It's a complex, dynamic thing, and its environment, and the supplements and medications and treatments we give it, because AI might actually be able to hold a lot of those complex and dynamic interactions and study them much more quickly and clearly than we can. So I think it's a really exciting space, and I think we're already starting to see a lot of technological advancements giving us rather a lot of data that's exciting.
Mm.
But it's also quite frustrating because we don't quite know what to do with it all yet.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's, yeah, a exciting, frustrating place to be as a practitioner.
Yeah, and I'm delighted that you're positive about AI because it's not going to go away. And as you say, it could synthesize, a cortisol results or, a Dutch test or something quite quickly and then allow us into more detailed conversation
Yeah.
with our clients.
And just kind of help us understand what do gut microbiota changes mean?
Yes.
What does it actually mean? Because we've gone from thinking, oh, okay, there's more of this gut microbiota than that one, and this is bad and that one's good, so therefore this is a bad thing, to now we're starting to understand, oh, it's about the relationships. And
Yes.
oh, they're producing metabolites like chain fatty acids, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Oh no, it's not about good and bad. It's about their relationship with each other and what else is going on and what's happening. And it's, it's technology that's helping us to understand that. So I have high hopes for it there. But yes, I think we do need to be worried about what's happening with AI in other areas. But in terms of how it's going to potentially help health and medicine, I think it could be phenomenal. But we do have to, like with all testing, like with all technologies and all data, we have to do what we've been talking about a lot today, Elizabeth, and just keep grounding that with
Mm.
our own experience, expertise, and the client stroke patient values, preferences, priorities, what they want, what they feel, what's actually meaningful to them. That has to drive and help shape what we do with all of this data.
Yeah, you're so right. And just a moment of excitement for me this week was opening up the British Medical Journal to find on the editorial page an advert for a book on metabolic health written by a clinician. And on that front page, it said for all students and doctors interested in functional and integrative medicine. And I kind of was like, my goodness, I know it's an advert for a book, but for it to be placed on that first page, I hadn't
Mhm.
seen that mentioned in a mainstream medical journal before. So you're right. We live in exciting times, and it's how to ground the information, and you put it very beautifully. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and we need to have more. And good luck with your book. We'll put all those links onto the show notes.
Lovely.